if you were here yesterday, my name is Teresa Krupeczka. I'm a Scrum Master at Nelnet. Oh, we're all at Nelnet, sorry. Scrum Master at Lincoln. It's been long. In the Lincoln office.
And I'm Brett Bushman, Agile Coach based out of Eau Claire. I see some Eau Claire people here, which makes me really happy. Thanks, guys.
Brett and I have worked together for almost 3 years? Something like that. For a while, we worked together. And the first time we met was in Highlands Ranch in Liverpool. So we had to get this sit selfie. All right.
So, how can no work for you? Raise of hands. Who has a hard time saying no to people? Who's hoping they'll teach you a better way to say no to people? You might be semi-disappointed. So, what we're actually going to focus on is how can we get other people to say no to us first? Right? So that sounds a little crazy. I get that. But getting other people to say no to us first, to disagree with our position or with something that we're saying, will actually put them in a mindset that makes them more agreeable and easier to talk to. Right? So it's all about how do we negotiate whatever our position is with this other person, whether that's, I need this day of ETO, or I think this is how we should handle these backlog items in the sprint. Right? Most of life is negotiation in some way, shape, or form. And so this is just going to be another tool in your tool belt to help you to get other people to disagree with you first, which puts you in a better position then to disagree with them. So it can be a full-on conversation instead of just two sides shouting at each other, which is never good. Right? So no helps people feel safe. That's the primary thing that helps them. It gives them a safety net. The second they are allowed to disagree with you, they feel like they are back in control of the conversation. So regardless of whether they were the ones with the power initially or not, it makes it feel like, okay, yeah, we're both in this spot together. Right? So that's thing number one. It makes them feel secure in that position too, right? Safe and secure, those two things go together. Control, right? So we discussed all those. So the first thing it lets us do then is it lets us learn, right? When someone disagrees with us, we learn information, right? When someone just agrees with us, all we learn is that they agreed with us, right? We don't know what their differing opinions are, what other things that we might need to take into account to make this decision better, and how we can do other things better. So no, it lets us learn primarily. It lets us create boundaries around the conversation. Right? So when we say no, we realize we've encountered a boundary in some way, shape, or form. Right? And whether we need to push that boundary is part of that conversation we're going to need to have, but it's going to let us not have just total chaos in our different conversations that we're having. And it lets us slow down the conversation. Right? So if it seems like things are moving in a direction you don't want it to, if you can get the other person to disagree with you on something, it's actually going to slow it down, force them to think about what's going on. Right? So it's going to put them back in that area of safety and control, so they're not going to feel the need to force it. I can't guarantee it's going to work 100% of the time because people are weird beasts. Right? Our brains tell stories to themselves all the time, but this is a way to get other people's brains to focus back on the conversation. And it lets us protect from incorrect decisions, right? If we know the decision that we're going down is wrong in some way, shape, or form, this is going to allow us to put a release valve into that conversation. To say, hold up, right? We said we can slow down that conversation. Slowing down makes people think about things. We're not trying to rush, we're not trying to force things. And then it gives us that release valve to say, okay, maybe this isn't the way we need to go. Maybe we do need to slow this down and change our decision.
All right. So what are some examples of why we feel we say yes too early? So we have a couple scenarios here at work. So why do we feel like we say yes too early at work? Jared?
Pressure.
pressure,
To please the boss.
please the boss.
You're gonna have to do it anyway.
You're gonna have to do it anyway, so you might as well just say this to start. Any other
You like to make people happy?
make people happy skills? We want to meet the expectations of others and do a good job. Does anybody not want to do a good job at work? And if you were here for Chris's opening session on Tuesday, we talked all about expectations, right? So we feel like there's an expectation at work that we say yes. We need our jobs, right? We need to put food on the table and pay our rent or house payment, and sometimes we feel like if we don't say yes, our job may be in jeopardy. How about in our personal relationships? Why do we say yes too early?
Not fight.
Don't want to fight? You're on thin ice already, you don't want to like fall through the hole.
Sometimes it's easier to say yes than it is to say no.
It's the easier answer, right? Then you'll just figure it out after that, instead of having to have a conversation about it. Relationships are important to us, right? We want people in our lives to like us. We want to make them happy. We don't want them upset with us. How about in general? Are there any other examples of why we would say yes? It's not work-related or relationship-related?
It's actually something we don't want to do.
Yeah, you want to do it. You want to say yes because it sounds fun, right?
Build relationships.
Yeah, to build those relationships. We want to please other people. We fear being disliked and rejected by others. I know, I have that problem. I want to be liked by everybody. We say yes, more likely than not, to make other people happy. But I like his answer back there better, to make us happy. How about if somebody's in a position of power? Not even your boss, but somebody else in the company or somebody with perceived power? Does anybody else have a hard time saying no to them? So always saying yes has its consequences. It can have some physical consequences on you. And there's also a quote by Esther Derby, who's kind of an agile celebrity, I call her. She's I had the chance to see her at Agile Alliance conference. She's really a good lady. But her quote is, if you can't say no, then your yes doesn't mean much. It's like people assume that you're always going to say yes. So saying yes all the time can add a lot of stress to our already stressed lives. So you say yes to doing a project or volunteering on a committee, and then you got to figure out how you're going to meet those commitments. Like, how am I going to find the time? I'm going to stay up an extra hour every night. It can build up anxiety and frustration. So once you've added that stress, it adds to your anxiety. You can feel disappointed in yourself if you can't meet those expectations after saying yes, or you feel like you have to cut corners. You can feel like you're disappointing the other person and yourself. You can start feeling angry at the other person for asking you. Has anybody ever thought that, especially my example that I think of are your spouse, like, why did they ask me to do that one more thing? And it can have a physical effect on high blood pressure, depression, or low self-esteem. So thinking of meetings that we're all in all day long. The cartoon here, in case you can't see it, is they're in the yes room. And it says sometimes we need a no room also. So having a room where you could go say no. So you imagine yourself in a meeting, your team has come to a decision, and you walked out of the room. How often have you felt, yes, I love it, let's go? Or, yes, it's the best alternative, but let's go do it. You're behind it 100%. Or are you, yes, it's the best alternative, but let's consider how. Like you're starting to question it, like how are we gonna get to that? Yeah, it was okay, but I like the other options better. You've already agreed to it, but you're leaving the room already questioning the decision. Yes, I'm nodding my head, but I'm not convinced. Or yes, I'm nodding my head, but I'll actively block this after the meeting. I heard some snickers on that one. So if you would have just not given in the beginning, would you be more likely to leave the meeting at, yes, let's go do it? If you can't agree to the decision, why would you try to block it in the end? Does that save us time? Does that provide us value? Probably not.
All right, so how can I start using no, right? We just talked about some of those yeses actually mean no, right? We don't want those from other people coming back at us either, right? When they're gonna actively block us. So we're going to talk about just a little conversational basics, right? Just level set again around what we need, around how we're gonna do this. Then we're actually gonna practice having people say no to us so we can have the power to say no back, right? So start with the basics. First thing, use the language of the person you're talking to, right? All of my developer friends in here, that means not a lot of acronyms. Don't go deep into the server-side talk. They're not going to understand it if you're not talking to a developer, right? We need to speak in the language of the people we're talking to. If there's something we need to explain, we need to make sure we take the time, set aside the time to make sure they understand whatever that acronym happens to be, or at least why it's important that we have to change that, right? If you're more in the analysis side of things, you have your processes. Don't assume everyone's going to understand what your process is off the bat. If there's something you need to explain, right, double check. Practice. Look at what you're going to talk about before you talk about it so that you can make sure you're not just going to throw a bunch of jargon at someone and they're just going to stare at you like, well, those were words. Right? The second really important rule, our goal isn't to win the conversation, right? This isn't Facebook. We're not just trying to win imaginary internet points and have an argument on Facebook, which is what my Facebook wall seems to be all the time. Clearly I need better Facebook friends. Right? We're not trying to score points. We're trying to come to some kind of shared pool of understanding and come to an agreement that we're all on board with, right? Or that we can at least all live with. We don't want people to do that. Yeah, this is great, but I'm going to actively block you, right? I'm not actually on board. I can't actually live with this. I'm already second-guessing the decision. Right? So the skills we're going to practice is about how do we get to that, and how do we make sure the other person isn't giving those back to us. And ask a lot of questions. Stay curious. Right? You learn more from asking questions than you do from just talking. Right? I can talk to you for 15 minutes, but without a question in there, how do I know, if you're asking questions back at me, then I know you're engaged. Then I know you're learning. The other person knows that you're engaged in the conversation as well. Right? So if there's not a lot of questions back, they're probably just thinking about stuff in their own head, right? If you were in Erin's session yesterday, she talked about the different levels. Was it yesterday or the day before? One of those days. She talked about the different levels of listening. Level 1 listening is you're in your own head. Right? You're thinking about what you're going to say next. So even if you're asking a lot of questions, you want to engage with the person in front of you. Look them in the eyes. Right? Make sure you're actually paying attention to what they're saying and not just what you want to say back to them. That's one caveat with that. All right. So the first actual technique that might be new for some of you is called labeling. Labeling is where we're going to, right, if we're actively listening to them, we're going to ask them a question to make sure we understand what they're talking about. And that's called labeling. So you restate their phrasing back to them. So you say, so it sounds like this is what you actually meant, right? It sounds like it's generally how you start out a label, like that, right? So this shows the person we're talking to that we are engaged in the conversation. And it gives them that chance, this is one of their first chances to say no to you, right? It sounds like you wanted to go down this route with these different options. No, that's not what I meant at all, right? Okay, we learned something, right? We learned that this is not what they actually meant, that this is not where they wanted to go. Okay, so now we can ask more questions, we can learn more things, we can actually figure out what they want to do so that we're all on board. Right? And this will also give you the opportunity then to say no back at some point, because hopefully they'll be like, how did you misunderstand that? Or here's the other things I did, is that what you thought it was? It's like, well, no, I thought it was this other thing completely different over here. Right? So this is going to give you an opportunity to say no as well. Hopefully assuming the other person is engaged in the conversation. Right? We can only control ourselves in these situations. We can try to talk to the other people. Probably a good point to mention too. We can't control the other person. They are unique individual people who do their own things. Right? So there is also a concept called mislabeling. And this is something you want to use sparingly, right? This is not lying to them, but it's kind of the nuclear option in a conversation if you don't think the other person is paying attention to you at all. Right? They're clearly thinking about what they're going to be doing for dinner. They're not engaged in it. They have no idea what you're doing. So you started out the same way. So it sounds like, and then you purposely say it differently than what you actually think they mean. Right? So you're going to get them back into the conversation. They say, wait, what? No? No? That's not what I meant. Right? So it's going to build that in there. Remember, it's something you use sparingly though. I only bring it up because I think it's important. It's the nuclear option, right? We don't want to go nuclear right off the bat. Right? This isn't an arms race, remember? We're not here to win. It's just another tool. So, the next topic is extreme questioning. Right? So this is also going to be if it feels like the other person isn't engaged, but it's going to give them the opportunity to say no. And sometimes they can come off as rude, but is it better to be just perceived as slightly rude, especially here in the Midwest, where we're, a little passive-aggressively nice sometimes? Right? Do you want this project to fail? I mean, if they say yes, then that's good information to have. Why are you doing this if you want this to fail? Right? But if they say no, then usually you get the reason why they're not responding to you, or all this other stuff came up. Oh, hey, how can I help? Or how can I get this up higher up in your priority? Right? You can phrase it however you want, but it's cutting right to the core of what you think the actual issue is. Right? So again, also use sparingly, but it gives them the opportunity to say no. Right? And so then you'll probably have the opportunity through that next conversation to say no back to them. Because it will pull them back into whatever conversation they are not a part of. Right? So, next thing you should do, we're going to get our no face on. Alright? So we're going to practice. So nobody stand up yet, right? Because it's going to get loud. I'll tell you when to start. When we start, you're going to find a partner.
And do-si-do.
Yes. I want each person to think of a time or a conversation where it did not go the way you were hoping, right? Either you wanted to say no, but you weren't able to, or the other person came to what you consider to be a wildly incorrect decision. And then we're going to practice how no could have changed that conversation. Because practicing important conversations, if we know they're coming beforehand, can help us have better conversations. So we're going to practice. I'm not going to call it role play because I don't think that's the right term for it. And everyone hates role play sessions. Right? So, but how could the strategic use of no, right? Labeling back at them what you think they mean, right? So we could have gotten on the same page again. Does that make sense so far? Yeah, I'm just seeing blank stares, so I don't know what that means. Head nods, dances, something. Maybe? Okay. want you to take turns practicing that conversation with the other person with your scenario, right? So you will describe the scenario to them, and then you're going to practice where they're going to be the other person on the other side of the conversation. All right, so you have your scenario. You're going to explain it to them, like what? This is what I want to talk about. Here is the role you are playing. Dang it, still work the role playing in there. Try not to. Right, so this is the role of the person. Here, here's what's going on there. And then we're going to practice that conversation back and forth, right? You're going to have to use your imaginations just a little bit. Put yourself in their shoes. But we want you to practice on how no could have made that conversation go better. You have 4 minutes, each person, because you're going to switch then at the end of 4 minutes.
So I think for those that have been here and those that have not, again, the rules are, if somebody shares something with you, please keep it in confidence. Don't be going back off and saying, this person would have wanted to say no to you when they asked you this. So keep it confidence of your partner. Brett and I will walk around if you have any questions. We'll help you through that. But yeah, if you can't think of a scenario, just maybe practice like approaching that person and asking them to do something, and the other person practicing saying no back. Especially to Steve, because I know how intimidating Steve is. All right, we'll give you 4 minutes each person, starting.
Yep, I'll put 4 minutes on the clock right now.
I'm dozing in. So we're just supposed to think of a situation, and I have to say this to you, or say it to me, and then one of us has to say no, and then drag it into maybe we feel inclined to come to grade, so we don't say no. Where are we supposed to go with that? I have a hard life, so I get to a lot of things. So I hope to take it away. At least my son takes that.
to share how their conversation went? No? I'm so proud of you.
Mic drop, we're done.
That side is gonna kill me if we break their mics.
I think it's working better since he dropped it.
Yeah, I do too. That's what we're to say. How do you think you will use this in the future?
Maybe we should ask if it seemed useful first.
Yeah.
Yes.
I really like the idea of slowing the conversation down. So if you feel like people are getting ahead of themselves, you know, to kind of say, well, what I'm hearing is, and maybe it's not like purposely like really bad, but like not quite right. Like force them to say, well, that's not quite what I was saying. Because I think sometimes you kind of see people getting ahead of themselves and like, or even losing me. It's like, okay, what are we exactly talking about? I kind of like that idea of kind of interjecting and say, like, is this what you're saying right now? And kind of force them to kind of restate it.
Can everyone hear him?
Yeah.
That's good, because I didn't want to repeat all that. Very animated.
Slow the conversation down.
Rob?
That's the lyrics version.
So thinking about more thoroughly thinking about the reasons why you want to say no, maybe thinking ahead of that a little bit more rather than just walking initially and then saying yes because you feel pressured into it, but really take a second to think about it.
Yeah, take some time to think. Ask the person, do I have to give you an answer right this minute? Can I think on this a little bit? Another tool we didn't talk about, I think I shared it last camp, is what I'm learning about myself when I say yes is, well, if I say yes, what are the expectations? Like, if I agree to this, what is being expected of me? Like, so if I volunteer for this, what does that include? So like, before you say yes, and then not really knowing what's going to be expected of you, that's difficult too. There was, oh, Derek.
The other thing to make sure you understand is the when.
The
Because
when,
some people
when.
think somebody's asking for something and they automatically think it's got to be done right now.
Yeah.
But I think you need to confirm that. Does it have to be done now? Or what is the time frame that you're looking for this to be done by?
Yeah, you think about that even like in our project works or like projects we might be asked to do, and we assume that has to be done right away when we had a conversation and say, well, if we do this, you know, when do you expect it to be done? Like, or pieces of it, right? We had some hands in the back.
Well, I was just going to say that 5 represents 7%. You got to think about the other percentages. 7% is the word no.
Right.
What's your tone?
Yeah. Those communications, you know, like what's my body saying?
There's no and there's no.
Yeah. And there's hell no.
That's a good one. Another thing that you can use is find someone who has no problem saying no if you know you're getting into a difficult conversation, right? Any of my former bosses who are in here can attest to the fact that I have never had a problem telling them no. So, use them, right? It helps to have a partner sometimes, right? Have them help you.
Yeah, have a practice conversation if you have. If you don't have to give an answer right away, maybe role play. Role play. Have that practice conversation with somebody so that you can kind of work through all those feelings and the worry of upsetting someone else.
All right. Any questions, comments? Scathing remarks from here?
No, yeah, we got somebody really good at saying no over here.
Fantastic. Take notes, people. All right.
So, we're gonna practice our Oprah mode. You get a no, and you get a no. Somebody over here is really good at it. Start shouting at it. You get a no. Come on, everybody. Practice saying no. You get a no. Everybody gets a no. All right. Well, we gave you lots of extra time. So if you have questions, or again, if you ever want to just practice having that conversation with someone or getting someone to say no to you, like Brett was saying, reach out to a trusted coworker, reach out to Brett or I or Aaron or Chris or someone else you trust, and role play it. Sorry.
Practice it.
Practice it.
Practice the
Practice
crucial
it.
conversation.
So, all right, thank you
All
guys.
right, thank you, everyone. Next session starts at 11 with Aaron Volk.